the sound was different?
Yes.
Yes? Yeah. It's much. Hayden said. That's because he put it up yesterday. Fabulous. We're going to jump into a passage in a minute. One of those sort of weird passages in the Old Testament. But I think it's got a number of things for us to look at. But before we do that, we've been looking over the last couple of Sundays, and this Sunday it's kind of been a refresher. We spent a bunch of months last year looking at what God was calling us to do as a congregation, and we've been touching in on that. And our vision is it's a triangle. Can you see that? It's probably very faint. No? Okay. There's an up, and there's an in, and there's an out. There's a triangle. Have you got that? That's as far as I'll draw. So we've got this triangle, and our up is our worship of God. It's our gathering together to praise His name, to be formed by Him, to be known as His children. And that's why we do our retreats that you see that are on our sheet. That's why we gather on a Sunday. That's why we have our discipleship courses. All of those things are part of that. Our in is our family gathering times. That includes our weekend away. That includes our games night. That includes our shared lunches. All of those things. It's being in and out of each other's homes. And that sort of thing. That's us being family. And I talked about last week how, for me personally, I feel very at ease with just those two. You know, orientating myself to God and orientating myself to being part of the family. But I find it really difficult to include this other one, which is the out. That's the doing the mission thing. That's the building God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. I find that difficult and vulnerable. But as I talked about a couple of weeks ago, is that it is our DNA. To be church is to be missional. That's why we unpacked a little bit in Matthew, in the end of Matthew's Gospel, where Jesus commissions His disciples. He says, go and make disciples of all nations. You know the one I'm talking about? Baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey what I've commanded you. And I'll be with you always to the end of the age. So in that commission, we translate that as go and make disciples. But in the Greek, the best translation is as you go. And the reason that it's as you go is because it's expected. It's normative. It is what we do. So to be church means to worship God, to be family, and to be missional as part of building His kingdom. That is what it is. And I know that we all feel different. Some of you might find mission really easily. I know there's a bunch of evangelists in this room who, when they sit down next to someone who doesn't know Jesus, they can't stop themselves. And it's wonderful, you know? And, it's amazing. Anne is wonderful. She just bubbles up with love for Jesus. Isn't it infectious when you're around her? Do you find that? I find that. You know, yes. Yes, that's right. I don't know if you call that. Lorraine, who's a minister here till recently, she said an evangelist can make a coffee cup sound interesting, but I think a coffee cup is interesting.
This one's got coffee in it.
But we're all called to do those things. But sometimes we've got into this mindset that the evangelists are supposed to go do that. Those who are supposed to apostle and bear new things, they go do that, and I'll go do the worship thing. But that isn't what it is. What it is they help us learn how to do evangelism. They help us how to do apostling. Because to be church is to do all three of those things. And so that's why we've been doing a big plug on our four missional outputs that we've been doing. We've got Bible Friends, which has been going for a number of years, but we've included that as part of our gig. And then we've got our Story Club, which we're launching in March. If you see on your calendar, that's coming up soon. And we've been sending out invites, and more people are asking for them. And we've got over 300 invites out there, and there's more coming out through Age Concern who are really excited that we're doing this. And so they're sending it out in their newsletter. So pray for that as that happens. We need some more volunteers. We need some more people to be around for that. So that would be great if you wanted to jump on that team. The other one that we're just starting is our mentoring thing, and I'll talk to that in a moment. But I just want to pause for a moment and invite Brenda up, who's going to come and speak to us for a moment about Bible Friends. Because each Sunday what we want to do is remind ourselves that this is what we do. We do worship God, that's why we sing and we praise, and that's why we do communion together. We do fellowship, that's why we have morning tea, that's why we do the peace. But we do mission too, and we wanted to talk about that as part of our service. So Brenda, could you just fill us in on where Bible Friends is at, maybe tell us about what's coming up the weekend soon. Yeah.
Bible Friends, as Caleb said, has been going for 16 years, and it's for people that have intellectual disabilities mainly. On a good night we have 25 of us there. On Tuesday nights in the upper lounge, and it's interdenominational, all ages, and we're all pretty excited. We run through term time, but we're all pretty excited because the weekend 8th of March, which is Friday through to Sunday 10th, it's the annual camp at El Rancho, and there's about 18 of us going down for a weekend where we are really put in touch with God, and the worship is absolutely fantastic, and it's a great time, and the leaders all come home absolutely exhausted, but we've had lots and lots of fun. It's a time of growth for a lot of people.
It's amazing, isn't it? An amazing ministry. They just gather and they share Bible and time together. Has anyone been to the Bible Friends Nativity? It's one of the highlights of Christmas. So watch out for that when we come to that. But let's pray for Brenda and the team and for Bible Friends. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for Brenda. We thank you for the rest of the team. We thank you for all those who come. We thank you for those with intellectual disabilities who step up and say, I want to be a leader too. We pray your blessing on them. And Father, we pray for your blessing on this weekend away that they have together. Lord, we pray that you would take them deeper into you. You would encourage them, and that they would have a blast. In Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, Brenda. Cool. Can we turn, if you've got a Bible, then do, otherwise it'll be up on the screen, to 2 Kings, chapter 13. 1 and 2 Kings is one of our history books in the Old Testament, and it's a history book that's a little bit confusing because towards the beginning of 1 Kings, Solomon's reign ends. Solomon is the son of King David, who's our great king of Israel, and then what happens is the kingdom of Israel splits in two. I don't know if you knew this, but we've got a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. The northern kingdom is made up of 10 of the tribes of Israel, and that gets called Israel in this historical document. And the bottom two, which is Judah and Benjamin, they just get called Judah. And so the southern kingdom, and what happens in 1 and 2 Kings is we get a kind of a blurred, non-chronological ordered story of the kings. So sometimes things jump out of order, and that's because, yes, they're telling history, but yes, there are themes that they're weaving through. So in fact, actually, there's a character in this little scene. We've got King Joash. If you read a few verses earlier, he's died. So he's back. It's not because he's come back to life, it's because the story's in a different order. But they put this in order for another reason which we don't have time for. But we've got a situation where King Jehoash is... he comes from a lineage of nightmare. So his father and his grandfather and his great-grandfather, they weren't just bad kings, they were really, really, really bad kings. I mean, in the sight of what we've got in our worship of God, they didn't just not worship God, they worshipped other idols. And they brought other idols into the temple. They made the nation worship other idols, and they made their priests worship other idols, and they made sacrifices to these other idols, including child sacrifices. And they got caught up in this. I mean, is any of that okay? None of that is okay, and particularly when we've got this God, Yahweh, who just loves and loves and loves and loves, and he gets frustrated with them, but then he can't help himself, and he loves them again. And he keeps on giving them grace, and they keep on going to these other gods who provide them with nothing but blood. Anyway, Jehoash is one of them. And he's just picked up this habit from his heritage. I don't know if sometimes you feel like you picked up habits from your parents. Hopefully not child-killing ones. But do you know what I mean? Sometimes we have that, sometimes we pick up habits. I have habits from my parents. Some of them are great. My dad tells stories, so I tell stories. I love that. But then there's some things that my parents do or my grandparents do that I do that are just really not great. Do you know what I mean? I'm arrogant. I think I'm better than I am. Anyone else have that issue? You know what I mean? Some of us don't think that we're as good as we are. That's also not okay. We get that from our parents, don't we? Yeah? Anyone got an anxious grandma? Yeah? And then you're anxious and your kids are anxious and you're wondering why? We inherit these things, don't we? King Jehoash is bringing into his life all of this parentage. But the wonderful thing about King Jehoash, and we get it a few verses before this story, is that it says even though he was in the midst of doing these things, and it lists him as having, sacrifices in the temple to this other god. But what happens is it says that in the time of trouble, King Jehoash called upon the Lord, and the Lord heard him. Isn't that wonderful? I'll say that again. In the time of trouble, he called upon the Lord, and the Lord heard him. No matter where you come from, no matter what you do, God will always come when you ask. And he always listens. Isn't that magnificent? I love that song we sang earlier. Faithful you are. All your promises are yes and amen. You always come through. Always. He never fails. Never has and never will. That's the God that we've got. And King Jehoash, even in the midst of his mess, recognises that. Anyway, we've got this situation where I'll probably just read a few verses at a time and then talk to that, if that's okay. So it says, now Elisha was suffering from the illness from which he died. Elisha is the prophet of Israel at this time, and he is a magnificent miracle worker. And he has done incredible healing things, but he was a disciple of Elijah. Do you recognise the name Elijah? So Elijah is one of our greatest prophets. In fact, at the Transfiguration, when Jesus is up the hill, who turns up? Moses and Elijah. So he's significant. Okay, and Elijah takes on this little kid, this disciple Elisha, and he trains him in the way of prophecy. And he trains him in the way of leading and seeing and casting vision and training people. And so Elisha has got this in his psyche about being a disciple. There's this wonderful moment when Elijah is passing away and going off to heaven. He's taken up in these chariots, which we get mentioned over here in a minute. And Elisha is left behind, and all that's left behind of Elijah is his cloak. And so Elisha collects up his cloak, and he says, and he walks over to the river Jordan. And at this moment, we've got all the priests of Israel are on the other side of the river, and they've seen Elijah being taken up, and they're all wondering if Elisha has the same power as Elijah. And Elisha comes up to the riverbank, and he lifts up the cloak, just like Moses lifted up his staff, and he says, where is the God of Elijah? And he strikes it, and the river parts, and he walks through on dry ground. Elisha is bold. In fact, he actually asks Elijah for a double portion of Elijah's skill. And if you count it up, and I've done this, I haven't read it anywhere in any scholarship, but I went and counted them all up. Elisha does exactly double the amount of miracles that Elijah does. I don't think that's an accident. He's been discipled and trained in him, but he's bold. And he says, I claim this God who always comes to us when we call. So there we go. So we've got Elisha. Elisha is at the end of his life, and we've got a situation where this king who is terrible needs some support. He's about to be overrun by these, I don't know what we call them in this translation, probably Syrians. They're called a number of different things in different translations. But basically these other nations are coming to take over Israel, and Jehoash is freaking out, and he needs a word of hope from Elisha. So he goes down to Elisha, and he goes into Elisha's home. Now there's this wonderful phrase where it says, Jehoash, king of Israel, went down to see him. That translated in the Hebrew is sort of like you humbling yourself. Going and visiting someone who is of a lower rank. And the first thing I want to point out here is that King Jehoash recognizes that he needs to step down and meet with Elisha. He needs to put himself in the position of being discipled. Are you with me? In our walk with Jesus, primarily we need to recognize that we need him. Yeah? I know we say that, but we act like we don't. Do you know what I mean? And we build our houses on sand. He offers us life in its fullness, and he says, come, listen to me. Come and be my disciple. Learn from me. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. That's the invitation. And that's what we see in King Jehoash as he comes down and he weeps before Elisha and he cries over him, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. We have the next slide. And Elisha says this, get a bow and some arrows, and he did so. Second thing to point out, okay, is that what Elisha doesn't do here is sit there and give Jehoash some encouraging words. Yeah? Did you notice that? Doesn't, So it's going to be okay, buddy. It's all right. Because Elisha, who knows about discipleship, he's been trained by Elijah, and he knows about discipleship. He knows that the best way to be discipled is through action. Are you with me? We have this thing in the Western world where we're information gatherers. Anyone notice that? When we run our discipleship courses, what we do is you read a book, or you go and attend a course or something. Yeah? And then we wonder why it doesn't affect us, and we don't become more loving people. Are you with me? But it's interesting, the manner of Jesus, when Jesus took his disciples around, what does he do with them? He takes them out into the towns and villages and teaches them how to do miraculous signs and wonders, to cast out demons, and then they do so. And that's what we see on the job, exactly, on the job. And so Elisha is giving him commands here. So, we've got to humble ourselves to be disciples, and we've got to recognize that discipleship happens by instruction. And then we've got this wonderful kind of truncated phrases where Elisha says, get a bow and some arrows, and he did so. The next slide. Take the bow in your hands, and he said to the king of Israel, when he taken it, Elisha put his hands on the king's hands, he guides him here. Go to the next one. Open the east window, he said, and he opened it. Shoot, Elisha said, and he shot. I love this kind of, just simple language. The Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory over Aram, Elisha declared, you will completely destroy the Arameans at Aphek. Can we just go through? I'll go through to the end for Aram. And then he said, take the arrows, and the king took them. And Elisha told him, strike the ground, and he struck it 3 times. And then he stopped. The man of God was angry with him and said, you should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. And then you would have defeated Aram and completely destroyed him. And now you will defeat it only 3 times. Elisha died and was buried. That's it. That's the end of the story. Yeah? Weird. It is actually. Well, then yes, there's another bit, all right. And then Elisha's dead, and he brings someone back to life by someone touching his bones, which is why I think they've truncated and shifted this around into the different order. Anyway, that's a sidetrack. But we've got this weird story of just this snippet of Elisha, has got this king who's come down to him, who's been willing to be discipled. He gives him some instructions. He says, take this, take your bow, shoot it out the east window, strike the ground. He strikes it 3 times. And he's like, why are you going to strike it 3 times? And then he dies. And it's over. It's just one of those weird passages because there's a bit of history. But there are a number of gold bits in it. The first gold bit that I want to talk about is that he instructs him to open the east window. Now, compass signals in ancient literature are very significant. And in this, he's not saying open the east window because that's the way to Jerusalem, or that's the way to Mecca, or that's the way to anything. This message is actually for everyone across the globe. What comes from the east? The dawn. Yeah? The newness. Jehoash is standing in his kingdom, which is being attacked. And Elisha is saying to him, look that way. Because the one who is more faithful than the sunrise is coming. And he's bringing his kingdom. And that's why he gets so excited when he shoots the arrow that way. And Elisha gets caught up in that. And he gets overblown with it. He's saying, this is the victory. This is amazing. You're going to win this victory. Now, I just want to make a little thing for you. We've got this wonderful thing where Elisha sees the victory before the victory has happened, before the battle. Yes? So the first bit of gold nugget, and then I've got another bit of gold nugget in a second. The first bit of gold nugget is this. It is coming, and the victory is already won before we battle. I heard this quote yesterday. As Christians, we don't fight for victory. We fight from victory. It's already won. His kingdom is coming. If we choose to fight and live by our kingdoms, or we choose to encourage the kingdom of this world, we will be on the losing side. Because love wins. God's kingdom is coming. More and more and more. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it, but it is. It's more now than it has ever been. And it is just increasing. So when we step into God's mission, when we do these missional outfits, when we step into changing into His way, we're stepping into the winning side. I don't know about you, but I want to be on that side. Not just because it wins, but because it's the good one. It's the one that is going to have eternal significance. Are you with me? So that's the first thing. Look to the east, the dawn is coming. The next thing I want to point out is this bizarre moment where Elisha says to King Jehoash, hit the arrows on the ground, yeah? And he bangs 3 times. And then he's like, why did you only bang 3 times? Now there's a little bit of context we have to understand in this. There's that in ancient warfare, what happens when you have a battle with another nation is you get up early in the morning and you have a little battle and then you stop for morning tea. Well, actually what happens is they stop after a moment when they're all tired, and it is tiring carrying chainmail on a sword. Is anyone worn chainmail? It's heavy. And so they pause, they stop, and they remove their dead, and they do their practice, and they come back the next day. And then they come back the next day. And if one army battles 3 times in a row and wins 3 times in a row, the momentum is with them. And what tends to happen is the losing army just leaves. They leave because they, 3 losses is too much. And so they go back to their place and they recuperate so that they can come back another day. And so what King Jehoash is asking for here is just to win this little skirmish. 3 little battles and they'll go back and recoup. And Elisha's like, why did you only ask for 3? If you kept banging, the Arameans would have been completely wiped out and never returned. Why did you ask so little of God? Is what he's saying. Are you with me? As we step out in mission, as we step out with our birthing of our story club and our mentoring program, as we step out and do these things, we can pray small prayers. We can pray, Lord, I pray that a seed will be planted somewhere in somebody that I have a conversation with. Anybody prayed like that? Yeah? With little hope. We pray by hitting 3 times on the ground and then stopping. Is that what we want? To be a nice little club that gathers most Sundays? That it's safe and cosy and warm? That we sing our favourite hymns? Or do we want to see Wanganui lit up for God? Do we want to see Wanganui saved? Do we want to see children not being in pain anymore? Not having to go home to families that are broken, where there is abuse? We want to see Wanganui the first place where there is no more domestic violence. It doesn't happen in our town, not because we have a poster up about it, but because they don't do it. Do we want to pray for that?
Yes.
Do we want to pray that there are no more teen suicides here, ever again?
Yes.
That we have our gangs who surrender themselves to the name of Jesus. And they love each other, and they reconcile with one another. That families that haven't spoken to each other for decades come and they welcome each other, and they share in each other's homes. Do you want that?
Yes.
That's what he's asking us. That's what he's saying. He's saying, bang more. Ask for more. I'm the God of the universe, and I have everything available for you. Do you want this, he says. He says, come and ask me. And if you ask it in my name, I will grant it. So the only thing that stops King Jehoash in this, and the only thing that stops us, is our small mind. And our belief that God doesn't care. But he does care. And he loves the people of this land. And he loves this place. And he loves you, and he loves your families. He loves the members of your families who don't know Jesus. He loves every one of them. And he wants them to be brought into his kingdom because it's the best thing for them. Do you want this? I want this. I want this with every fibre of my being. And this is why we commit to these things. Sometimes it's scary stepping out and doing mission, but it's the winning thing. And we step out into it with a faith that says, God, we want you to do immeasurably more than all we ask and imagine, according to your power that is at work within us. He's doing that in and through us. Just going to close with one last story. This week on Wednesday, the Salvation Army put together amazing research, and they released and and share what they call the State of the Nation. Does anyone see that in the newspaper? You'll also notice the Anglican Church got in the newspaper this week. Yes, that was cool. Paul and Anna looked great, eh? She looks tired and hot and pregnant. But it's the State of the Nation, the Salvation Army put out this thing, and it got streamed live across this country, including here in Wilmington, where the mayor and the deputy mayor and many of the leaders of the social work that goes on across this city were gathered there, and a couple of our church leaders, Billy was there. And at the end of the State of the Nation, which the way they described it, it's not great right now. It's not great right now. There is a lot of work to do. There are many families who don't have homes. There are many families who can't feed their kids. There is a lot of abuse out there. There is a lot of brokenness out there. We have still too many people who are stuck in a cycle of crime. Even though we don't put them in prison as much because we want to reduce our numbers, we've still got mess and brokenness. And so the State of the Nation was declared, and it was not happening. And Nigel Irwin, who's our great friend, who's the senior pastor of the Baptist church down here, he stood up, like many did who spoke up afterwards, and he said, I just want to say that there are many discussions that take place across this city where we try to work on the social good, and the church isn't sitting at any of those tables. And he said, I want to say that over the last 6 decades at least, we have dropped the ball, and we are sorry. Isn't that amazing? For a leader to stand up and own that we need to be doing what we're doing. He said, we have a gospel that speaks to this. And so I'm going to give my utmost to get us moving in this direction. Now, Billy was speaking to a couple of the people who were there, and they said to her, what's your name, where are you from, what are you doing? And she said, I'm Billy, I'm from the Anglican Church. And they said, we met Louise this week. She came to speak to us about your mentoring program you're doing. It sounds like you guys are doing massive, amazing things. Isn't that cool? I spoke to our Story Club meeting that we had on Thursday night where we were looking at what we're going to be doing for our seniors. And I said to them, what you're doing here by signing up to this is picking up the ball. Are you with me? We want this stuff. And the ball is there to be picked up. There is a space for us to stand and not only join in with what God is doing, but to pioneer and lead it. That is what He's calling us for. I want to pick up the ball. I want to run with it. And I want God to use us as a family to shine like stars in this universe, to grow His kingdom. Should we pray?